Dawn broke over the jagged horizon, painting the alien sky with streaks of crimson and amber. Alwyn moved with practiced efficiency through the underbrush, his weathered hands checking the traps he had set the previous evening. His face, hardened by years of solitude and survival, remained expressionless as he discovered a small, blue-furred creature caught in one of his snares, food for another day. Alwyn's movements were deliberate and precise, the product of 3 years alone in this wilderness. He collected his catch, securing it to his belt before continuing his morning patrol. The terrain was familiar now, the sharp rocks that could tear open boots, the deceptive patches of quicksand disguised as solid ground, the areas where predators were likely to hunt. This knowledge kept him alive in a world that seemed determined to eliminate the last human presence. He paused at the ridge, overlooking the valley, his keen eyes scanning for any signs of danger. The twin suns were climbing higher, casting double shadows that stretched long across the blue-tinted vegetation. Nothing moved that shouldn't. Satisfied, Owen began the trek back to his shelter, a converted cave reinforced with a mixture of salvaged materials and local resources. Home was a generous word for the place Owen had carved out of necessity. The entrance was narrow, defensible, concealed behind a natural formation of rocks and alien vegetation he had carefully cultivated. Inside, the space opened to reveal the ordered case of a survivor's existence. Weapons line one wall, spears with tips fashioned from the bones of local predators, a bow made from flexible wood-like material, arrows fletched with fibers from resilient plants. Each tool represented hours of craftsmanship, trial, and often painful error. Alwyn built a small fire in the stone pit at the center of his cave, feeding it with dried vegetation that burned with a faint blue flame but produced little smoke. Another survival adaptation he had learned. He skinned his catch with a knife made from a fragment of his crashy, one of the few pieces of technology he still possessed, though even that was primitive by the standards of the world he had left behind. As the meat cooked, Owen turned his attention to maintaining his weapons. His fingers worked automatically, sharpening blades and checking the integrity of his bow string. On the wall opposite his arsenal, a series of marks chronicled his time on this world: 1,187 notches, each representing a day of continued existence against the odds. When his gaze fell on the small object tucked into a natural shelf in the cave wall, his hand stilled. The tiny stuffed animal, worn and faded, was grotesquely out of place in this harsh environment. Alwyn reached for it, his callous fingers surprisingly gentle as they traced the outline of what had once been his daughter's favorite toy. It was all he had left of her, all he had managed to grab before the evacuation that had ended with his shuttle crashing on this uncharted world. For just a moment, the hardness in his eyes softened, revealing the man he had once been: a father, a husband, someone who had known more than just survival. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the vulnerability vanished, replaced by the emotionless mask he wore as protection against memories too painful to indulge. Alwyn ate mechanically, focusing on the nourishment rather than the taste. Food was fuel, nothing more. As the second sun began its descent, casting the world in a peculiar dual twilight, he secured his shelter for the night. This was the most dangerous time, when the larger predators emerged to hunt. he was just about to seal the narrow entrance when a sound stopped him. Something between a whimper and a gasp, distinctly not belonging to any creature he had encountered on this world. His hand moved instantly to his knife, body tensing as he peered into the gathering darkness. There, partially hidden by the blue foliage, stood a small figure, not an animal but a child. Her skin was a pale blue, almost luminescent in the fading light, marked with scratches and dirt. Her eyes, large and silver, reflected terror as they locked with his. For a long moment neither moved. Alwyn had not seen another sentient being in 3 years. The child appeared to be of the indigenous species, humanoid, but distinctly alien, with that blue-tinged skin and silver eyes too large for her small face. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9 by human standards, though he had no way of knowing how these creatures aged. Child took a hesitant step forward, then stopped, her small body trembling visibly. When she spoke, her voice was thin and wavering, but her words came in perfect, accentless English, a shock that momentarily unbalanced Elwyn's carefully maintained composure. My parents were killed today, she said, each word fragile as glass. Can I stay here tonight? Human Alwyn remained frozen, his mind racing to process this unexpected development, the presence of a child, an alien child who spoke his language, raised countless questions, none of which mattered in the immediate moment of danger that his instincts were already registering. He stepped past her, scanning the darkening landscape with narrowed eyes. The air carried a familiar scent, the musky, acrid odor of the apex predators that roam these lands, creatures he called razorbacks, for the sharp ridges that ran along their spines. Their sense of smell was unmatched, their hunting patterns relentless. If they had killed the child's parents, if they had her scent. Alan dropped to one knee, examining the ground around the cave entrance. There, barely visible in the dimming light, were the tracks he feared, massive paw prints with distinctive claw marks at the tips. The pattern was clear to his experienced eye, a hunting pack moving with purpose, following a trail directly to his shelter. He straightened, his face hardening as he turned back to the girl. They're already coming for you, he said, his voice rough from infrequent use. The girl's silver eyes widened further, a small sound of despair escaping her lip as she took a step backward. Owen moved quickly, gathering at his spear and a small pack he kept ready for emergencies. His instincts told him to abandon the cave, to disappear into the wilderness alone, as he had always done when danger threatened his temporary homes. It was what had kept him alive this long. No attachments, no responsibilities beyond his own survival. But as he prepared to leave, the child's gaze caught his, a look so filled with desperation and abandonment that it pierced through his carefully constructed emotional armor. For an instant he saw his daughter's face superimposed over the alien features, heard her voice calling for help as she had in his recurring nightmares. Alwyn exhaled sharply, a sound of frustrated resignation. They'll find us if we stay, he said, slinging the pack over his shoulder and gripping his spear tightly. He looked at the child for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. Come, relief flooded her small face as she hurried to his side. I'm Elsa, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alwyn didn't respond, already focused on their escape route. The cave had a secondary exit, a narrow tunnel that wound upward through the rock face. Emerging on the ridge above, it was tight and difficult to navigate, but it would buy them precious time. This way, he instructed, leading her to the back of the cave. Stay close, don't make a sound. They had barely entered the tunnel when the first sounds of intrusion echoed from the main entrance. Scraping claws, low growls, the heavy padding of massive predators entering what had been his sanctuary. Alwyn pushed Elsa ahead of him, his body blocking the narrow passage as they climbed upward through the darkness. The child moved with surprising agility, her small form better suited to the confined space than his broader frame. As they neared the upper exit, a thunderous roar shook the tunnel. The Razorbacks had discovered their scent trail leading to the escape route. Alwyn quickened their pace, emerging onto the ridge just as the sound of powerful bodies forcing themselves into the tunnel reached his ears. Run, he commanded, grabbing large rock from the ridge's edge. He waited just long enough to hurl it down at the first Razorback's head as it emerged, buying them precious seconds before taking the child's arm and pulling her into a sprint across the elevated ground. The foggy forest loomed ahead, a dense collection of tall, thin trees with luminescent blue bark that created an eerie glow in the now complete darkness. It wasn't an ideal refuge. The fog would hide them visually, but the Razorbacks hunted primarily by scent. Still, the dense vegetation would slow the predators and provide more opportunities for evasion than the open ridge. Alwyn led them along a stream for several hundred yards, the flowing water helping to diminish their scent trail. When Elsa began to lag, her smaller legs unable to maintain his pace, he lifted her without breaking stride, carrying her as they plunged into the misty depths of the forest. Behind them, the enraged howls of the hunting pack echoed across the night, the sounds bouncing off rock faces and making it difficult to gauge their distance. For hours they moved through the forest, Alwyn alternating between carrying Elsa and allowing her to walk when the terrain permitted. He employed every evasion technique he had mastered, doubling back, creating false trails, using the natural features of the landscape to confuse their pursuers. The child followed his lead without question, her instinct for survival evident in her quick adaptability. When Alwyn finally called a halt, they had reached a small clearing surrounded by dense undergrowth. The sounds of pursuit had faded to distant, sporadic howls. They needed rest, if only briefly. Sit, he instructed, gesturing to a fallen tree trunk. Elsa obeyed, immediately collapsing onto the makeshift seat with obvious exhaustion. Owen remained standing, his senses alert. As he assessed their situation, "You need to learn quickly if you want to live," he said, his voice low and serious. "No crying, no calling out. Move against the wind when possible. It carries your scent away from predators. Step on hard surfaces that don't take footprints. Listen more than you speak." Elsa nodded, absorbing his instructions with an intensity that seemed beyond her ears. "I know some things," she said quietly. "My father taught me to recognize dangerous plants and which berries are safe." Alwyn acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Local knowledge would be valuable. Can you climb?" "Yes," she answered. "We lived in the high groves to the south." "Good. If we get separated, climb as high as you can. They can't follow you to the thinnest branches." He paused, studying her. "Why Do you speak my language? Elsa's silver eyes reflected the bioluminescent glow. Of the forest around them, we learn all languages when we're very young. My father was a translator between the settlements, the word caught Elwyn's attention. In 3 years he had encountered no signs of civilization, no indication that intelligent species inhabited this world. Beyond the occasional ruins he had discovered, he had assumed them abandoned centuries ago, before he could question her further. Elsa stood, suddenly moving toward the edge of the clearing. Her foot slipped on the wet vegetation, sending her sliding toward a sharp drop that Owen hadn't noticed. In the darkness, a ravine cutting through the forest floor, its bottom lost in shadow. He lunged forward, his hand closing around her arm just as she began to fall. For a heartbeat she dangled over the edge, her wide silver eyes locked with his. Then he pulled, dragging her back to safety with a strength born of desperation. They collapsed together on solid ground, both breathing heavily. Elsa's small hand clutched his arm, her fingers trembling against his skin. Owen found himself reluctant to break the contact, the first human touch he had experienced in years. Thank you, she whispered, still holding on to him. Owen nodded once, then gently disengaged himself and stood. We need to keep moving, he said, but his voice had lost some of its harshness. Stay closer to me. They continued through the night, pushing deeper into the forest as the twin moons rose overhead, casting strange, overlapping shadows through the canopy. By the time dawn approached, Elsa was stumbling with fatigue, and even Alwyn's hardened stamina was reaching its limits. He found a suitable hiding place, a dense thicket of thorn bushes, with a small hollow at its center, accessible only through a narrow crawl space that would be difficult for the larger predators to navigate. After carefully checking for dangerous insects or other inhabitants, he ushered Elsa inside. Sleep, he told her, positioning himself at the entrance where he could maintain watch. I'll wake you if danger comes. Elsa curled into a tight ball, hugging her knees to her chest for warmth. Despite her exhaustion, she seemed reluctant to close her eyes. Will they find us? She asked, her voice small in the confined space. Not if we are smart, Alwyn replied, his attention focused outward, scanning the forest beyond their shelter. My father said humans were smart, she murmured, her eyelids finally drooping. He said you came from the stars. Alwyn didn't respond, but the comment stirred memories he usually kept buried of the colony ship, the evacuation, the final moments before his shuttle was separated from the main vessel during the attack. So much lost so quickly. He glanced back at Elsa and found her already asleep, her chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep exhaustion. In sleep, her face relaxed, the fear temporarily erased from her features. The resemblance to his own daughter became even more pronounced, not in the alien features themselves, but in the vulnerability, the innocent trust of a child believing an adult would keep them safe. The comparison opened a wound Alwyn had thought long scarred over. He turned away, focusing again on the forest, on the immediate threats that were real and tangible, not on the ghost that haunted his dreams. Yet as he maintained his vigil, something shifted, almost imperceptibly inside him, a crack in the wall of isolation he had built around himself since the crash. The day passed in tense silence. Alwyn allowed himself brief periods of rest while Elsa slept never fully surrendering to sleep but drifting in a state of half-consciousness where his senses remained alert to potential danger. By late afternoon, the distant sounds of the hunting pack had faded entirely, suggesting they had lost the trail or moved on to easier prey. As dusk approached, Owen was considering whether to move under cover of darkness or remain hidden until morning when a sound froze him in place, the soft padding of heavy feet on the forest floor, much closer than he had expected. A low, rumbling growl confirmed his fears. Solitary razorback, perhaps separated from its pack, had managed to find their scent. Alwyn reached for his spear, moving with deliberate slowness to avoid creating noise. Elsa stirred at his movement, her eyes opening. Before she could speak, he pressed a finger to his lips in a universal gesture for silence. Her expression showed instant understanding, her body tensing as she registered the danger. The razorback was circling their hiding place, its massive form visible in fragments through the gaps in the thorn bush barrier. It was larger than Owen had initially estimated, its muscled body covered in leathery hide, rigged with the bony protrusions that gave the species its name. Its elongated head swung from side to side as it tested the air, four nostrils flaring as it processed their scent. Alwyn's signal would for Elsa to move deeper into the hollow while he positioned himself at the entrance, spear ready. His plan was simple but desperate. The confined space would limit the creature's mobility and reach, giving Owen a fighting chance despite being grossly outmatched in strength. If he could deliver a precise strike to one of the predator's vital areas, the throat or eyes, they might survive this encounter. The decision was taken from him when the razorback suddenly charged, its powerful body smashing through the thorn bush barrier with far less resistance than Alwyn had counted on. He thrust his spear forward, the sharpened point scoring along the creature's shoulder, but failing to penetrate deeply enough to cause serious damage. The razorback's response was immediate and via lance sweeping paw that caught across the chest, sending him sprawling backward into the hollow. His spear remained embedded in the creature's hide, leaving him armed only with the knife at his belt. The predator advanced, its massive body filling the entrance to their shelter, blood from its superficial wound spattering the ground as it growled in rage and pain. Alvo scrambled to his feet, drawing his knife end, positioning himself between the advancing razorback and Elsa. The creature's eyes, yellow and slitted like a reptile's, focused on him with predatory intensity. It was calculating, assessing. These weren't mindless beasts but intelligent hunters, which made them all the more dangerous. As the razorback tensed to spring, a sudden movement caught its attention. Elsa had grabbed a handful of dirt and thrown it at the creature's face. It was a futile gesture, more instinct than strategy, but it provided the momentary distraction Alwyn needed. He launched himself forward, driving his knife upward under the creature's jaw, where the hide was thinner. The blade sank deep, but the razorback's reaction was devastating. It thrashed wildly, one paw connecting with Alwyn's side with enough force to send him crashing against the wall of the hollow. Pain exploded through his rib cage as he felt something crack. The knife remained embedded in the predator's throat, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. Bleeding and enraged, the razorback turned its attention to Elsa, who had pressed herself against the far wall of the hollow, her small face tight with terror. Alain struggled to rise, fighting through the pain, knowing he wouldn't reach her in time. Then with surprising quickness, Elsa ducked and grabbed a sharp stone from the ground, hurling it with unexpected accuracy directly into the Razorback's right eye. The creature reared back, roaring in agony, pulling at its injured eye. The momentary blindness and pain gave Alwyn the opening he needed. He lunged forward, seizing his embedded knife and wrenching it sideways, tearing open the predator's throat in a spray of dark blood. Razorback's roar transformed into a gurgling sound as it collapsed, its massive body convulsing briefly before growing still. Silence fell over the hollow, broken only by their labored breathing. Owen remained tense, knife ready, waiting to ensure the creature was truly dead. When he was certain, he turned to Elsa, who stood frozen against the wall, her silver eyes wide with shock. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with pain and exertion. She shook her head, then pointed at him. "You are." Owen glanced down, noting the dark stain spreading across his side, where the Razorback's claws had torn through his clothing. The adrenaline was fading, allowing the pain to surface in waves of increasing intensity. He pressed his hand against the wound. Grimacing, "We need to move," he said, already calculating their next steps. "Where there's one, others will follow." He retrieved his spear from the Razorback's body, wiping the blade of his knife clean before when he turned back to Elsa, he found her approaching him cautiously, her small hand extended toward his injury. "I can help," she said softly. Before Alwyn could respond, she placed her palm gently against his side. A strange sensation spread from the point of contact, not unpleasant but unlike anything he had experienced before. Soft blue glow emanated from beneath her skin, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Alwyn watched in astonishment as the pain in his side diminished, the bleeding slowing to a trickle. When Elsa removed her hand, she swayed slightly, her face paler than before. The wound hadn't healed completely. It was still raw and open, but the bleeding had nearly stopped, and the sharp pain of broken ribs had dulled to a manageable ache. Alwyn stared at her, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. "What are you?" he asked, the question emerging before he could consider its implications. Elsa looked up at him, fatigue evident in her expression. "My mother could heal better," she said simply, as if this explained everything. "I'm still learning." Alwyn continued to stare, reassessing everything he thought he knew about this world and its inhabitants. "You're not just like me," he finally said, the understatement hanging in the air between them. "No," she agreed, a hint of apprehension entering her expression. "Does that matter?" The question caught Alwyn off guard. 3 years of isolation had left him unprepared for such direct emotional inquiries. He looked at this child, alien in form but so human in her fears and needs, and found himself unable to maintain the emotional distance he had cultivated for so long. "No," he answered, surprised to discover he meant it doesn't matter. He tore a strip of fabric from his already ragged shirt, binding the partially healed wound as best he could. "We need to leave this place," he said, returning to the practical concerns of survival. "Can you walk?" Elsa nodded, though her exhaustion was evident. Alwyn gathered his limited supplies and led them out of the hollow, stepping carefully over the razorback's massive corpse. The forest had grown darker as night fell, the bioluminescent trees providing just enough light to navigate by. They traveled in silence, moving more slowly than before due to their injuries and fatigue. Alwyn found himself periodically glancing back to check on Elsa, a habit he couldn't quite explain to himself. She followed without a complaint, occasionally reaching out to steady herself against a tree trunk when the uneven ground challenged her balance. After an hour of careful progress, they reached the edge of a shallow canyon, a natural bottleneck that would force them to either descend and climb the other side or follow its edge for miles to find a crossing. Alwyn stood at the rim, considering their options. Behind them carried on the night wind came the distant but unmistakable sound of howling. The pack had found the dead razorback and would soon be on their trail again. Elsa moved to stand beside him, her silver eyes reflecting the moonlight as she gazed into the canyon. "We can't outrun them forever," she said, her voice small but steady. All knew she was right. They were both injured and exhausted. The pack would eventually run them down, and the next confrontation might not end in their favor. His gaze settled on the canyon's narrow width and steep walls. It was a natural defensive position, limiting the directions from which they could be attacked, providing high ground advantage and potentially allowing them to funnel the predators into prepared traps. "We stopped running," he said. "Decision made. We fight here." Elsa turned to him, studying his face with an intensity that belied her youth. After a moment she nodded, acceptance rather than fear in her expression. "What do we do?" For the next few hours they worked together with the efficiency of a long-established team. Alwyn showed Elsa how to sharpen sticks into stakes, how to position them at angles that would impale charging predators, how to gather rocks of suitable size for throwing or dropping from above. She learned quickly, her small hands proving adept at tasks requiring dexterity. They prepared the battlefield methodically. Narrow approach lined with concealed pits, sharpened stakes positioned to channel the razorbacks into vulnerable positions, piles of rocks staged at strategic points along the canyon rim. Alwyn worked with a focused intensity, drawing on tactics he had developed over years of surviving in this hostile environment. What surprised him was Elsa's contribution, not just in following his instructions but in offering suggestions of her own. She identified a type of sap that, when spread on the ground, created a slippery surface that would destabilize the predator's footing. She showed him how certain blue flowers, when crushed, produced a scent that masked their own. Not enough to hide them completely, but sufficient to confuse the razorbacks' tracking abilities temporarily. As they worked, the howls grew closer, more distinct. The hunting pack had picked up their trail and was closing the distance rapidly. By the time the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, their preparations were as complete as time would allow. Alwyn positioned Elsa on a ledge above the canyon floor, high enough to be out of immediate ray of the predators, with access to one of their rock caches and a clear escape route up the canyon wall if needed. He took position at ground level, concealed behind an outcropping of rock with his spear and knife ready. "Remember what I showed you," he told her, his voice low. "Wait until they're fully committed to the attack before you start the Rockfall don't hesitate, they're faster than you think, Elsa nodded her expression solemn. I won't let you down. She promised the childish phrase, carrying the weight of their shared survival. Alwyn held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, finding himself unexpectedly moved by her courage. I know, he said simply, then returned to his position to await the coming attack. They didn't have to wait long. The first Razorback appeared at the canyon entrance just as the twin suns crested the horizon, its massive form silhouetted against the morning light. It paused, testing the air, sensing the trap but unable to resist the promise of prey. Behind it, more shadows appeared. Alwyn counted at least 6 additional predators, a larger pack than he had anticipated. The lead Razorback advanced cautiously, its nostrils flaring as it detected the confusing mix of scents Elsa had created. It stepped forward directly onto the section of ground covered with the slippery sap. Its paws slid unexpectedly, throwing it off balance just long enough to trigger the first pitfall trap. The creature's front leg plunged through the camouflage covering, impaling itself on the sharpened stakes. Below, its howl of pain and rage signaled the start of the battle, the rest of the pack surging forward in response. Alwyn emerged from hiding, hurling a spear with practiced accuracy that caught a second Razorback in the throat before the others could react to his presence. Elsa began her part of the attack, sending a cascade of rocks down upon the packed predators. The stones bounced and rebounded in the narrow space, striking the Razorbacks from multiple angles, creating confusion and channeling them deeper into the prepared killing ground. 2 more predators fell to the hidden pits, their howls echoing through the canyon. Alwyn moved quickly, dispatching one injured creature with his knife before turning to face another that had avoided the traps and was charging directly toward him. He braced himself, spear set against the ground to receive the charge, but the Razorback was more cunning than its fallen packmates. It veered at the last moment, powerful legs propelling it partially up the canyon wall, attempting to reach Elsa on her ledge. Alwyn shouted a warning, but Elsa was already responding, kicking loose prepared stack of larger rocks. They tumbled down, catching the climbing predator mid-leap and sending it crashing back to the canyon floor. Before it could recover, Alwyn was there, driving his spear deep into its exposed underbelly. The battle continued in this fashion, a brutal dance of attack and counterattack, with human ingenuity and planning matched against the raw strength and ferocity of the predators. Dust filled the air, mingling with the sounds of combat and the acrid scent of Razorback blood. Alwyn fought with the calculated precision of a veteran survivor, each movement economical, each strike placed for maximum effect. Above, Elsa maintained her role, creating diversions, triggering prepared traps, and calling out warnings when Razorbacks attempted to flank Elwyn's position. By the time only 2 predators remained, Alwyn was bleeding from multiple wounds. His breathing labored, his movement slowing from exhaustion. The smaller Razorback retreated, slinking away down the canyon, apparently deciding the prey wasn't worth the continued risk. The remaining predator was the largest, the alpha of the pack, nearly twice the size of the others, with scars crisscrossing its hide from countless previous battles. It stood at the center of the canyon, surrounded by the bodies of its packmates, yellow eyes fixed on with an almost sentient hatred. This was the moment of greatest danger, a wounded, enraged alpha with nothing left to lose. Alwyn knew his strength was failing. The partially healed wound in his side, reopened and bleeding freely, he would have only one chance to end this. Alwyn, Elsa's voice called from above, drawing his attention briefly upward. She pointed to a section of the canyon wall where their preparations had included loosening a section of rock face. The strategy was clear. If he could lure the alpha to that position, Elsa could trigger the rock slide, potentially crushing or trapping the creature. Alwyn nodded once, then turned his full attention back to the alpha. He adjusted his grip on his bloodied spear, took a deliberate step backward, then another, drawing the predator toward the targeted area. The razorback followed, its movements measured, seemingly aware that this was the final confrontation. When Alwyn had positioned himself with his back near the loose rock face, he deliberately lowered his spear tip, presenting the appearance of weakness and fatigue. It wasn't entirely an act. His vision was beginning to blur at the edges, his body responding to blood loss and exhaustion. The alpha recognized the opportunity, gathering itself for a final devastating leap. As its powerful hind legs tensed, Alwyn suddenly dropped flat to the ground. The razorback sailed over him, its momentum carrying it directly into the trap zone. Now Alwyn shouted, rolling to the side as Elsa dislodged the key support stones. The canyon wall collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of rock and dust. The alpha razorback had only a moment to register its fate before being buried under tons of falling stone. Its final roar cut short by the crushing weight. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the settling of small stones and the harsh sound of Owen's breathing. He remained where he had fallen, the last of his strength expended in that final evasion. Through the settling dust, he saw Elsa descending rapidly from her position, half climbing, half sliding down the canyon wall to reach him. She knelt beside him, her small face tight with concern as she assessed his injuries. Without a word, she placed her hands over the worst of his wounds, a deep gash across his chest where the alpha's claws had caught him during an earlier exchange. The now familiar blue glow appeared beneath her skin, stronger than before, fueled by desperation rather than skill. Alwyn felt a strange healing energy flowing into him, more intense than the previous time. He wanted to stop her, sensing that the effort was draining her already exhausted reserves. But he couldn't find the strength to speak or move. His vision tunneled, consciousness slipping away despite his efforts to remain awake. The last thing he saw was Elsa's determined face above him, her silver eyes glowing with the same blue light that emanated from her hands, her small features set in a mask of concentration that looked incongruously adult on her childish face. Then darkness claimed him. When Alwyn regained consciousness, the canyon was bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. He lay where he had fallen, but someone had placed a makeshift pillow of folded leaves beneath his head and covered him with a layer of soft vegetation for warmth. His wounds had been bound with strips of fabric torn from his own clothing, supplemented with some type of fibrous plant material he didn't recognize. He attempted to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his body. Despite Elsa's healing efforts, he was far from recovered. The movement attracted immediate attention. Elsa appeared from behind a nearby rock, Formation carrying a container, fashioned from large leaves that held water collected from a seep in the canyon wall. You shouldn't move yet, she said, hurrying to his side. You lost a lot of blood. Winwin ignored the advice, forcing himself into a sitting position. Through sheer determination, the pack, he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper, all dead except the one that ran away, she reported, offering him the water. It didn't come back. Alwyn drank gratefully, the cool liquid soothing his parched throat as awareness returned. Fully, he took stock of their situation. They were alive against considerable odds, but both injured and vulnerable, a position that wouldn't remain secure for long. Scavengers would be attracted to the razorback corpses, and there was always the risk that other predators would investigate the disturbance. We need to move soon, he said, testing his limbs to assess his mobility. Not today, Elsa replied with unexpected firmness. You can barely sit up. Alwyn wanted to argue, but recognized the truth in her assessment. He wouldn't make it far in his current condition. Reluctantly, he settled back, conserving his strength for the journey that would have to wait until morning. Elsa sat beside him, her small face showing signs of her own exhaustion. The healing she had performed had clearly taken a toll on her, yet she had still managed to collect water and attend to his wounds while he was unconscious. Thank you, he said, the words unfamiliar after years without human contact, for the healing, for the help in the battle. She nodded, accepting his gratitude with the straightforward manner of a child. We protected each other, she said, simply, as if this mutual defense was the most natural thing in the world. Alwyn studied her, seeing her clearly, for perhaps the first time since their paths had crossed. Beyond the alien features, the blue-tinged skin, the oversized silver eyes, was a child who had lost everything, yet continued to fight, to care, to heal. In her resilience, he recognized something of himself, something of his own daughter, something fundamentally courageous that transcended species. Your healing ability, he began, curiosity overcoming his usual reticence. Is it common among your people? Elsa shook her head. Only some families have it. My mother was very strong with healing, she taught me, but I'm still learning. Her expression clouded. She tried to heal my father when they were attacked, but there were too many of them. The simple statement carried the weight of tragedy, reminding Alwyn that this child had witnessed the death of her parents just days ago, yet here she sat, helping a stranger of another species, demonstrating a strength of character that many adults would envy. Your parents, Owen said, cautiously, uncertain how to navigate this conversation, but feeling compelled to try. They would be proud of how you've survived. Elsa's silver eyes glistened with unshed tears. My father always said survival wasn't just about being strong or fast. It was about knowing when to fight and when to run, when to trust and when to stand alone. She looked up at him. He would have liked you, I think. The comment caught Owen off guard, stirring emotions he had kept buried for years. I had a daughter. He found himself saying the words, emerging unbidden. She would have been older than you now. She was brave, too. What was her name? Elsa asked softly. Sarah, Alwyn replied, the name both painful and somehow healing to speak aloud after so long. Her name was Sarah. They sat in silence for a moment, united by loss, yet finding something like comfort in shared survival. Eventually Elsa spoke again. her voice hesitant. What happens tomorrow after we leave here? It was a question Alwyn had been avoiding. His existence for 3 years had been solitary, by necessity and choice, focused entirely on his own survival, taking responsibility for a child, an alien child with abilities he didn't understand, would complicate everything, make every decision more difficult, every risk more consequential. Yet as he looked at Elsa, he knew there was only one answer he could give. We stay together, he said, the decision feeling both terrifying and right, to survive better than one. The simple statement carried weight far beyond its words. It was a commitment, a promise, the formation of something like family in a world that had taken everything from both of them. Elsa's face brightened, hope replacing the uncertainty in her expression. She reached out hesitantly, her small blue-tinged hand hovering his. Owen completed the connection, his weathered fingers closing gently around hers in a gesture that bridged species, bridged worlds, bridged the isolation that had defined his existence for too long. As the twin suns began their descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield they had created, Alwyn found himself contemplating a future different from the one he had resigned himself to. Not just survival, but living, not just enduring alone, but sharing the journey. Morning came with renewed strength for both of them. Alwyn's wounds aided by whatever mysterious healing energy Elsa possessed had improved dramatically. Overnight, he was still far from fully recovered, but he could move without debilitating pain, which was all he required to continue. They gathered what supplies they could salvage, his weapons, containers for water, strips of cloth for bandages. Alwyn hesitated briefly, then extracted several useful teeth and claws from the razorback corpses. They would make effective tools and weapons components. Elsa watched this process with solemn attention, learning even in this grim task. As they prepared to leave the canyon, Alwyn found himself unexpectedly reluctant. This place of violence had somehow become significant. The site where two lone survivors had formed an alliance that was rapidly becoming something more meaningful. Which direction? Elsa asked, standing beside him at the canyon entrance, her small pack secured across her shoulders. Alwyn considered their options. His pattern for years had been to move randomly, never staying in one location long enough to deplete resources or attract undue attention. But with Elsa, perhaps a more purposeful destination was needed. You mentioned settlements, he said. Where your people live? Are they far? Elsa's expression grew troubled. The nearest one is 5 days journey to the south, but she hesitated, seeming unsure how to continue. But Owen prompted. My people fear humans, she admitted. The elders say your kind brings destruction. They tell stories of humans who came before you, who took without asking and kill without need. Alwyn absorbed this information without surprise. Humanity's track record with first contact scenarios was hardly exemplary, even in his own time. If others had come to this world before him, had behaved as conquerors rather than visitors, the indigenous population's weariness was justified. Would they welcome you back? He asked, focusing on the practical concern. Elsa nodded slowly. I think so. I have family there, my mother's sister, but they wouldn't. She glanced up at him, the worry in her silver eyes making the rest of the sentence unnecessary. They Wouldn't welcome me, Alwyn completed. Realization should have bothered him more than it did. After 3 years of isolation, the prospect of continued solitude wasn't as daunting as it once might have been, yet as he looked at Elsa, he found himself unexpectedly reluctant to part ways. This child had somehow broken through barriers he had constructed around himself since the crash, awakening emotions and connections he had thought permanently severed. The idea of returning her to safety only to walk away felt like abandoning something precious just discovered. We'll head south, he decided, get you closer to your people. Then we can decide what comes next. Compromise seemed to satisfy Elsa. She smiled, a quick, bright expression that transformed her alien features into something Alwyn found increasingly familiar and endearing. They set off at a measured pace, accommodating both Alwyn's injuries and Elsa's shorter stride. The landscape gradually changed as they moved southward, the harsh, rocky terrain giving way to more verdant valleys where the blue-tinted vegetation grew in greater abundance and variety. Elsa proved knowledgeable about which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties, which should be avoided. Local wisdom that supplemented Alwyn's survival skills. They developed a rhythm to their journey, Alwyn responsible for protection and navigation, Elsa for finding food and water sources unfamiliar to him. At night they took turns keeping watch, though Alwyn often found himself extending his shift to allow her more rest, unwilling to burden her with adult responsibilities despite her evident capability. On the 3rd day of their journey, they crested a ridge that provided a panoramic view of the land ahead. In the distance, perhaps 2 days' travel away, Alwyn could make out structures rising from a forested valley, not the crude shelters he had expected, but a sophisticated arrangement of dwellings built into and around the massive trees that dominated the landscape. Is that your settlement? He asked, pointing toward the distant community. Elsa nodded, her expression a mixture of longing and apprehension. The High Grove, she confirmed, where I was born. Alwyn studied the settlement with renewed interest. From this distance he could discern little detail, but the overall impression was of a civilization in harmony with its environment rather than imposed upon it. The structures seemed to grow from the trees themselves, utilizing natural formations rather than clearing them away. Your people are builders, he observed, respect evident in his tone. We shape what grows, Elsa explained. The trees are sacred. We guide them rather than cut them. Concept was fascinating, a fundamentally different approach to civilization than humanity's typically extractive methods. Owen found himself wishing he could learn more, see their techniques up close, understand this alternative path to development that his own species had largely bypassed. But such opportunities seemed unlikely given the history Elsa had described. They continued their journey, drawing gradually closer to the settlement. Alwyn noted that Elsa's steps grew both eager and hesitant as they approached her home, the natural desire to return to the familiar, wearing with the changes wrought by loss and new attachments. On the morning of the 5th of Gami, they reached the outskirts of the forest that housed the High Grove. The trees here were enormous, ancient giants with trunks wider than Alwyn was tall, their blue-tinged bark glowing with internal bioluminescence. Even daylight, the forest floor was a complex ecosystem of smaller plants, many bearing fruits or flowers unlike any Owen had encountered in his years of solitary wandering. Elsa moved with increasing confidence through this environment, clearly unfamiliar territory. She pointed out landmarks, shared childhood memories associated with particular clearings or unusually shaped trees, her earlier apprehension gradually giving way to the excitement of homecoming. Elwyn followed more cautiously, aware that they were likely under observation long before they would see any of Elsa's people. The thought was confirmed when they entered a small glade and found themselves suddenly surrounded by armed figures emerging from the forest, tall, blue-skinned beings similar to Elsa in general appearance, but with the height and bearing of adults. Their weapons were primitive by human standards: spears, bows, bladed weapons fashioned from materials Owen couldn't immediately identify, but held with the confidence of skilled users. Elsa stopped, her small body tensing beside Owen. He remained absolutely still, making no move toward his own weapons, maintaining a deliberately non-threatening posture, despite every instinct urging him to defend himself. One of the figures stepped forward, taller than the others, with elaborate markings on her skin and silver eyes that regarded Owen with undisguised suspicion and hostility. Elsa, daughter of Nara, the figure spoke in a language Owen didn't understand. The sounds musical but sharp. You returned to us with one of the destroyers. Elsa responded in the same language, her childish voice carrying unexpected authority as she gestured repeatedly toward Owen. Though he couldn't understand the words, the defensive tone was clear. She was explaining, perhaps defending his presence. The exchange continued, growing more heated. Other members of the group occasionally contributed, their expressions varying from curiosity to outright hostility as they regarded the human in their midst. Owen remained silent, recognizing that his best course was to allow Elsa to advocate for him in a context he didn't fully comprehend. Finally, after what seemed an interminable negotiation, the leader made a gesture of reluctant acquiescence. Elsa turned to Owen, relief evident in her expression. They will allow you to approach the settlement, she explained in English, as my guardian, under my protection. It's unusual, but because you saved me. She shrugged, the adult politics clearly beyond her complete understanding. Despite her role in securing this concession, Owen nodded his acknowledgement, still maintaining his careful neutrality. The armed escort arranged themselves around them, not quite prisoners, but certainly under close supervision. They proceeded deeper into the forest, following paths invisible to Owen's eye, but clearly established routes to those familiar with the terrain. As they approached the settlement, the true scale and sophistication of the high grove became apparent. The massive trees had been guided through some process Elwyn couldn't fathom to form natural archways, bridges, and platforms at various heights. Dwellings were integrated into the trees themselves, some seemingly grown rather than built, with living walls and roofs formed from trained branches and foliage. Light emanated from globes of bioluminescent material suspended at intervals, supplementing the natural glow of the tree bark. Residents emerged to observe their procession, their reactions to Alwyn ranging from fearful withdrawal to open curiosity. Children similar in size and appearance to Elsa were quickly ushered away by protective adults, though many lingered at safe distances, watching with Wishu's silver eyes. They were led to a central clearing dominated by the largest tree Alwyn had yet seen. A true giant that must have been thousands of years old, its trunk so vast that a dwelling had been formed within it rather than upon it. Here, their escort stopped the leader, gesturing for Elsa and Alwyn to wait, while he entered the tree dwelling. Alone, the Council of Elders will decide what happens next, Elsa explained quietly, standing close. Toe inside, I told them everything. How you helped me, how we fought together, how you're different from they humans in the old stories. Alwyn nodded, appreciating her advocacy while remaining realistic about their situation. If they decide I should leave, I will, he said. I don't want to bring trouble to your people. Elsa's small hand found his fingers, intertwining with surprising strength. You're my people too now, she said with the simple certainty of a child. The statement caught Owen unprepared, stirring emotions he had thought long buried. Before he could respond, the leader re-emerged from the tree dwelling, accompanied by several older members of the species, their skin a deeper blue, lined with age, their silver eyes carrying the weight of experience and authority. What followed was a formal council unlike any human proceeding Alwyn had witnessed. It took place in a chamber within the great tree, illuminated by the soft glow of the living wood and additional bioluminescent globes. The elders sat in a semicircle with Elsa and Owen positioned before them. No translation was provided, but Elsa whispered occasional explanations to Alwyn as the proceedings continued. Elsa was questioned extensively, her responses sometimes tearful as she recounted her parents' deaths, her flight, and her encounter with Alwyn several times. Elders interrupted with questions that seemed pointed or skeptical, but Elsa stood her ground with surprising maturity. Eventually, attention turned to Owen directly. One of the elders, a female with intricate spiral patterns etched into her blue skin, addressed him in perfect accentless English. Human, she said, you are called Alwyn, as the child tells us. I am Salara's sister too, Nara, who was mother to this child. Our histories speak of your kind as destroyers, as takers who see up worlds as resources to be consumed, rather than homes to be respected. Yet, this child claims you showed her kindness, protection, respect, that you fought to defend her when you could have abandoned her to save yourself. She paused, her silver eyes studying him intently. We would hear your words before judgment is made. Owen considered carefully before speaking. This was not a situation where strength or survival skills would prevail. This was diplomacy, a domain where he had little experience, even before his years of isolation. I came to this world by accident, he began, his voice rough from disuse but clear. My vessel crashed. All others with me were lost. I have lived alone, taking only what I needed to serve him, fighting only when threatened. He glanced at Elsa, drawing strength from her encouraging expression. When Elsa found me, she was in danger. Helping her was, he hesitated, searching for words to express what had been more instinct than decision. It was the right thing to do, the human thing to do, though I understand why you might not believe that. He straightened, meeting Solar's gaze directly. I don't ask for your trust. I know nothing about your people except what Elsa has shown me: courage, intelligence, healing, harmony with your world. These are qualities my own species has sometimes forgotten or rejected. I can learn from you if you allow it, or I can leave if that is your decision. Silara translated his words for the other elders who conferred among themselves in their musical language. The discussion continued for some time, with occasional glances toward Alwyn and Elsa that gave no indication of which way their decision might lean. Finally, Silara addressed them again. The council has decided. She denounced the human. Elwyn may remain within the boundary of the High Grove for the passing of one full moon cycle. During this time he will be observed. He will learn our ways, and we will learn more of him. At the cycle's end, a final determination will be made. She turned her attention specifically to Elsa. The child will return to her family dwelling, now under my care as her closest blood relation. The human may visit her there, but she will sleep among her own kind. Elsa started to protest, but Alwyn placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's a fair decision, he said quietly. More than I expected. The council was concluded, and they were escorted from the great tree. Silara herself led them through the settlement to a dwelling high in the branches of a secondary tree, connected to others by intricately grown bridges. The structure was beautiful. Its organic complexity, walls that seemed to have been coaxed into existence rather than built, openings that provided both light and ventilation without sacrificing shelter. This was your mother's home and now yours, Solara told Elsa, her formal manner softening somewhat when addressing her niece. I have prepared it for your return. Elsa looked around the dwelling with a mixture of recognition and pain. Memories of her parents clearly associated with this place. Alwyn remained respectfully near the entrance, aware of his status as both guest and potential threat. Sela turned to him, her expression guarded but not hostile. You will be provided with a shelter at the edge of the settlement, she informed him. You may move freely within the inner boundaries, which will be shown to you, but not beyond without escort. Do you accept these terms? I do, Owen replied simply. Thank you for your hospitality. Silara nodded once, then addressed Elsa again in their native language. The conversation was brief, but seemed to comfort the child, who eventually nodded in acceptance of whatever had been said. When Silara departed, Elsa approached Owen. I wanted you to stay here, she admitted, but Aunt Silara says it's better for both of us if things go slowly. She says the council fears what they don't understand, and they don't understand you yet. Alwyn knelt to bring himself to her eye, a gesture of equality he had found himself adopting without conscious thought. Your aunt is wise, he said. Fear is natural when facing the unknown. Will show them there's nothing to fear, one day at a time. Elsa nodded, but her expression remained troubled. Would you be all right alone after everything we've been through? The question touched Owen deeply. This child, who had lost so much, worried about his solitude rather than her own adjustment. I've been alone for 3 years, he reminded her gently. A few nights apart won't harm me, and we'll see each other during the days. This reassurance seemed to satisfy her. They said their temporary goodbyes, Elwyn promising to return the following morning, as he was escorted to his assigned dwelling, a small but comfortable structure at a ground level near the settlement's edge. He found himself reflecting on how Dramatically, his circumstances had changed in just a week's time, from solitary survivor to diplomatic representative of humanity, from isolated wanderer to connected guardian. Roles he had never sought but now embraced with a sense of purpose long absent from his existence. The path ahead was uncertain, the trust of Elsa's people far from assured, but for the first time since the crash, Owen found himself looking toward the future with something approaching hope. The days that followed established a new rhythm to Owen's life. Each morning he would meet Elsa in the central clearing. She enthusiastically showed him aspects of her people's culture, their methods of growing rather than building, their sustainable harvesting practices, their communal approach to child rearing and education. Under her guidance, supplemented occasionally by Silara's more formal instruction, he began to learn their language, mastering simple greetings and practical terminology. In return, Alwyn shared his own knowledge, teaching Elsa refinements to the survival techniques they had practiced together, showing interested community members how to set more effective traps or fashion more efficient tools. These exchanges, while initially viewed with suspicion by many, gradually fostered a cautious acceptance of his presence. Not all were welcoming. Some of the settlement's residents maintained their distance regarding the human with undisguised mistrust. Others, particularly the younger generation, approached him with curious fascination, eager to learn about the world beyond their forest and the species they knew, primarily through cautionary tales. As the days passed, Owen found himself drawn increasingly into the community's rhythms. He participated in communal meals, contributed to collective work projects, observed ceremonies whose significance he only partially understood but whose beauty transcended cultural barriers. Through it all, Elsa remained his anchor and advocate, her unwavering faith in him, opening doors that might otherwise have remained closed. The most significant breakthrough came nearly 3 weeks into his probationary period. A younger member of the community, a hunter named Talon, who had shown particular interest in Owen's tracking methods, failed to return from a solo expedition. As concerns for his safety mounted, Owen volunteered to join the search party, offering his experience in navigating the dangerous territories beyond the settlement's boundaries. After some debate, his offer was accepted. Together with 3 local hunters, Owen ventured into regions he had never explored, following Talon's trail with a combination of their native knowledge and his own hard-earned survival instincts. They found the young hunter trapped in a natural pit, injured but alive, having successfully defended himself against predators for 2 days. Before their arrival, the rescue cemented its acceptance among many who had previously held reservations. Upon their return to the settlement, carrying the injured Talon on a makeshift stretcher, they were greeted with a celebration that for the first time fully included, without qualification or hesitation. That evening, seated beside Elsa at the communal feast, Alwyn found himself approached by Silara. The elder studied him for a moment before speaking. "You risked yourself for one not of your kind," she observed. "Many among us would not have expected this." Owen met her gaze steadily. "Differences in appearance don't change what matters," he replied. "Courage, compassion, the will to survive, these things transcend species." Silara considered his words. then nodded slowly. Perhaps this is the wisdom your people have forgotten. According to our histories, perhaps it is what you were sent here to remind us. And yourself, before Owen could respond to this unexpected philosophical turn, Salara continued more practically. The council meets tomorrow to decide your status. I believe you have made your case through actions rather than words. As is our way of judgment, she departed, leaving Alwyn to consider her statement. Beside him, Elsa squeezed his hand, her expression hopeful. They'll let you stay, she said with childish certainty. They have to, Alwyn smiled, unwilling to dampen her optimism while maintaining his own pragmatic outlook. Whatever they decide, he said, these weeks have been a gift I never expected. The following day, Alwyn stood once more before the Council of Elders, this time alone. Elsa had been excluded from the proceedings, deemed too personally involved to participate in what was presented as a community decision rather than an individual one. The deliberation was conducted primarily in the native language, with Salara occasionally translating key points or questions directed specifically to Owen. He answered truthfully, neither minimizing his differences nor exaggerating his adaptation to their ways. Throughout, he maintained the dignified composure that had become his hallmark among the settlement's residents, respectful without subservience, confident without arrogance. When the council had heard of all testimonies and considered all factors, Salara delivered their verdict. Alwyn of Earth, she began formally, the council has determined that you pose no threat to our community and have demonstrated value through your actions and knowledge. You may remain within the High Grove as a resident rather than visitor, subject to the same expectations and protections as any who dwell here. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Furthermore, in recognition of the bond formed between yourself and Elsa, daughter of Nara, you are granted guardian status alongside myself. She will continue to reside in her family dwelling, but you may establish your permanent residence adjacent to hers if you so choose. The decision exceeded Owen's most optimistic expectations. He bowed his head in acknowledgement, finding himself momentarily speechless with gratitude and relief. Thank you, he finally managed. I will honor your trust. See that you do, another elder interjected in heavily accented English. Not all histories can be rewritten by single actions. Salara gave her colleague measured look before addressing Owen. Again, go now, the child waits anxiously for news. Alwyn found Elsa at her dwelling, pacing the limited space with nervous energy. When she saw his expression, she knew the outcome. Immediately, launching herself into his arms with a cry of joy that required no translation. I told you, she exclaimed, her small face radiant with happiness. I knew they would understand. Alwyn held her close, this child of another world, who had somehow become the center of his. They're giving us a chance, he said, setting her down gently. A new beginning for both of us. In the days that followed, Owen established his new dwelling, a structure that combined the organic growing techniques of Elsa's people with practical elements from his human experience. With assistance from community members who had warmed to his presence, he created a home connected to Elsa's by one of the living bridges that characterized the settlement's architecture. The arrangement satisfied both the council's desire for proper supervision of the child and Alwyn's need to maintain his role in her life. They settled into a new normal, Elsa attending the community's educational gatherings during the day, Alwyn contributing his skills to hunting and defense, both sharing meals and evening conversations that bridged their different backgrounds and experiences. One evening, nearly 2 months after his acceptance into the community, Alwyn sat with Elsa on a platform overlooking the forest canopy. The twin moons cast their overlapping light across the landscape, creating a silvery illumination that complemented the bioluminescent glow of the massive trees. "Do you ever miss your old world?" Elsa asked, the question emerging from comfortable silence Alwyn considered before answering, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I miss what it was before, the people I loved, the life I knew, not what it became at the end." Elsa nodded, accepting his answer with the direct understanding that characterized their relationship. "My mother used to say that home isn't a place but a feeling," she offered, "that you can carry it with you even when everything changes." "Your mother was wise," Owen replied, smiling at the child who had become his unexpected family. "Do you feel at home here now?" She pressed her silver eyes, searching his face. Alwyn looked around at the settlement that had accepted him, despite ancient prejudices, at the world that had nearly killed him but ultimately provided a second chance at meaningful existence. Finally, his gaze returned to Elsa, the bridge between his past and future, the catalyst for his redemption from mere survival to actual living. "Yes," he said simply, "I'm home." As they sat together in companionable silence, watching the nocturnal life of the forest unfold beneath them, Alwyn reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from the devastation of loss to the solitary struggle for existence, from unexpected encounter to mutual protection, from reluctant connection to chosen family. Each step had been necessary. Each challenge had prepared him for the next. In this alien world, amid people unlike himself in appearance but increasingly familiar in spirit, Alwyn had found not just survival but belonging, not just existence but purpose. The universe that had taken everything from him had, in its mysterious way, returned the essentials: connection, meaning, hope. And as Elsa leaned against him, trusting in content, Owen understood the most important lesson of his journey, that survival was merely the beginning, not the end, that even across the gulf of species and worlds, the capacity to care, to protect, to build a new remained the truest measure of humanity, his own and perhaps in all sentient life. Under the alien moons, surrounded by blue-tinged forest and the gentle luminescence of living architecture, a human and his adopted alien child continued their improbable story together, not as survivors merely, but as family, different in origin but united in heart. They faced an uncertain future with the certainty that whatever came, they would face it together.